I think it's time we talk about Biden's polling data, chances in 2024. Now we've got some more information. Now, let me be clear. We do not have all of the information necessary to make a 100% calculation about what Biden's going to do next and what the Democratic Party should do next, because it's still going to be a few more weeks until we got polling data that's truly sunken in the debate performance, where voters have fully evaluated how well or how bad Biden's done, or how bad, obviously. And if his bad performance weighs bad enough for them to go vote for the guy who called for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution as a convicted felon, because he has a lot of scandals himself as well. And while I see a lot of people talking about the Supreme Court decision adding, even more pressure to Biden because it looks like a victory for Trump, they just sent the case back down to lower court. So I don't think that necessarily is that problem gone. It's just that the court decision moved until after the election, and all the bad news that comes with him still having those charges against him will likely continue to trickle out and dribble out and negatively affect his campaign. But point is, we still don't have all the data, and it's actually kind of a good thing that I'm making this diversion, even though it doesn't seem that important at the start, because it is likely not going to have, or we're not going to get a final decision on whether Biden's staying in or leaving the race for at least another 2 weeks, even if the Biden campaign isn't saying it, because that's probably when they think the worst data that's coming from the Biden campaign is going to start blowing over. We're going to start seeing some negative data for Donald Trump again. We're going to see Biden have a few media appearances that reinvigorates his image in the public, or at least that's the plan. The plan seems to be that Biden will have media appearances, pick back up his image, continue to fundraise well, and if he can, then ride out the bad election numbers as they start to stabilize, because historically speaking, these debates don't have that large of an impact on the outcome of the election. Obama had terrible performances against Romney. Now, there's also a difference in how people perceived Obama after those terrible performances against Romney. We weren't getting back data that said a majority of Americans thinks that he's too old or mentally unfit to lead the country, which is the job that he is trying to uphold and trying to continue to keep against Donald Trump. But just to give the angle from the Biden camp that they are still waiting for more data to come out. But we have data. We have data, and we have decisions that we can look at right now to determine the future of the Biden campaign, if Kamala Harris is going to take over, and why Kamala Harris really is probably the most likely option if Biden drops out. And if Biden should drop out, because I think I'm coming with more information, more data coming out, with me now seeing what a convention at this stage would look like. I think I'm getting closer and closer to a decision, but I think for me to say anything definitive, I'm also going to have to wait a little bit longer for some more polling data. Based on the idea, of course, that our main priority is beating Donald Trump, that is how I'm making my estimation. So let's start with the Biden-Harris campaign having a campaign call with Biden and Harris to say that they're going to keep fighting. They're going to continue. They're going to keep campaigning, and that Joe Biden is still the candidate for president. And it isn't just on this campaign call that they've said this, but this is to reassure the campaign staff, which has been pretty nervous after the not fantastic debate performance, and to reassure those who might start to feel in the campaign that maybe somebody else should be at the helm, or we don't really know what's going on right now, to give guidance for Biden to show some campaign leadership. So that seems to be where the Biden campaign is right now. Like I said, they're waiting for more data to come in. They're waiting to say, hey, we can still fundraise, our polling data can recover, and Biden can still slam some media appearances. Now, that does not necessarily reflect good polling data in the here and now, though, because in the here and now, the Biden data, the polling data is still pretty bad. And even if they're saying publicly, and we'll get to the polling data in a second, that they will keep fighting, and in these campaign calls as well, we are getting some reports like that from the New York Times that Biden has told at least one key ally that he is considering dropping out of the race. We can read this as being reported by the Daily Beast, but it's from the New York Times. President Joe Biden has reportedly told a key ally that he knows his next few public appearances will determine if he stays in the race. The New York Times reports that Biden knows he must perform well in his Friday interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC News, which I will be watching, and I know probably a good amount of the people in the country will be watching, as well as during campaign stops in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. He knows he has 2 more events like that. We're in a different place by the end of the weekend, said the ally, referring to Mr. Biden's disastrous performance in the debate. The Biden's deputy campaign manager, though, quickly appeared on CNN to call the New York Times story false. And the White House has also come out and said that Biden is not considering dropping out of the race and that this is a false story. But can I just say, I think this is a measured approach from the Democratic Party. Switching to any candidate, as we're going to get into later, has risks. It has the problem of unforeseen scandals coming out that we haven't seen before. When people run for president, there's an amount of digging into their past that is not on the same level as in local politics, and it can get much deeper, and it can uncover stuff that can be quite uncomfortable for the candidates. And so Gavin Newsom might poll well now, but if Gavin Newsom is then shown to have been somebody who offed dogs like Kristi Noem, then that might affect his ability to become president of the United States. Whereas Biden is a known factor, and the unknown of a Gavin Newsom or another candidate who is, you know, well respected and powerful enough locally, trying to make that move to the national level, and the president out of all positions, that's a little different. Another reason why I think that it would be unlikely for it to be someone out of Kamala Harris is the fundraising problem. Is that if Biden drops out and it goes to Gavin Newsom cannot just pick up the campaign. It's the Biden-Harris campaign. It isn't the Biden-Newsom campaign. It isn't the Biden-Buttigieg campaign. It isn't the Biden-Pritzker campaign. It's the Biden-Harris campaign. So if they pick up the campaign, they can't pick up the donations. They can't take the over $200 billion war chest that the Biden campaign has built up and just use it for themselves. They'd essentially, this deep into a presidential campaign, have to start from scratch. Kamala Harris would not have that same disadvantage. Also, it's going to be politically difficult, or at least let's say a tense issue, for there to be any even perceived skipping over Harris.
Has donated $100.
But the Biden campaign denies the idea that they're considering dropping out. But let me just say, it is probably very wise for them to consider dropping out, for Biden to consider dropping out. And I'm not saying that it is the wise decision for him to drop out at this point. There is a lot of indicators that point towards that maybe being the smart decision. But what I am saying is, if they're not even considering dropping out or not listening to the people in the Democratic Party who are concerned, that is concerning. That is concerning, because the vast majority of the country is concerned about Biden's ability to not only campaign, but be able to do the job, even though I have more concern about his ability to campaign than his ability to do the job, just based on a results-based testing system. But it is something that the American people are concerned about. And when you're running a campaign, it's not a question about, well, can Biden actually do the job? It's a question of the public's perception of whether Biden can actually do the job. Somebody can be the best president in U.S. history, but if the public doesn't believe that, then it doesn't matter when it comes to running a presidential campaign. Not that I'm saying Biden's the best president in history, but I am saying when you compare him to Donald Trump and the legislative record of what he got accomplished, whether it comes to the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, when it comes to insulin cap, when it comes to the defense of Medicaid or Medicare, when it comes to getting more people on insurance, even though he's not being nearly as aggressive as he should be, when it comes to building upon to get a public option, whether it comes to his fighting for veterans who were hurt by burn pits, or any number of issues that I can point to that makes me think he's a better option, not even getting into the foreign policy stuff. At the end of the day, what matters is what the voters think. And so we have some data to talk about what the voters think. For example, as the byline on this article about Biden not considering dropping out of the race, it has a New York Times poll that shows Trump's lead being 49-41, 8 points. That's above the margin of error. For a lot of the polls you could see before the race, some had Biden up, Some had them tied, but most of them were within the margin of error. This one is clear outside the margin of error with Trump ahead. That's not the only one with Trump clearly ahead outside of the margin of error. A new Wall Street Journal poll has Trump at 48% and Biden at 42%, with 80% of voters saying that Joe Biden is too old to run for a second term. That's not the only polling data, though, that exists. And a lot of this polling data, and this is the problem with polling, especially when it comes to commentators online, is they'll show you the polling data you want to see. For example, the stuff you're going to see on Breaking Points, the stuff you're going to see on any Trump-affiliated news network, on any alternative news network that doesn't like Biden, that either wants him to crash or would be good to give viewership to see them crash, those are going to be the polls they cite. This poll, though, has a different result. The race, this is from CBS News, from a CBS News poll. The race for president has shifted in Donald Trump's direction following the first 2024 presidential debate. Trump has a 3-point edge over President Biden across battleground states and a 2-point edge nationally. So 2 points above Trump is 2 points ahead. That's within the margin of error. But when it comes to battleground states, he's 3 points ahead. He has more of an edge. And that's also an issue because in a lot of these polls, it's not just that Trump's ahead of Biden, is that Trump's ahead of Biden in swing states. And there was one poll that specifically got me concerned. Now, this poll, not as concerning. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, but there's also polls like this. There's not many polls that show Biden up. In fact, I've seen no polls that show Biden up. But there was one poll that was particularly concerning when it comes to these swing states, and it actually comes from within the Democratic Party. So this is not Rasmussen, okay? This is not a RNC poll. This is not some right-leaning polling group. This is a pollster that was specifically hired by the Democratic Party to measure how support has shifted. It was Open Labs, and we actually can see the leaked memo that was released. I don't know who leaked it, but it was leaked. So we can see the differences in Joe Biden's polling data pre and post debate. Now, they have key takeaways that we can read here, and a lot of this is really interesting. We can read through these very quickly to show you the key takeaways that they put at the front. These findings represent a snapshot of the landscape in the debate's immediate aftermath. It is possible that they can shift in either direction in the coming days. We'll continue to monitor closely. In tracking of whether votes feel more or less favorably towards Biden based on what they've heard in the past week, the share of those feeling more favorable hit an all-time low, with a magnitude of drops similar to the one we saw after the Afghanistan withdrawal, which, for those of you who remember, was probably one of the hardest times in Biden's presidency. Biden delivers on the promise that he made to get us out of Afghanistan, the promise that Trump didn't get to deliver in his 4-year terms. He'll say he built the groundwork for it at Doha. Other people would say that he built the groundwork for failure of the withdrawal. But pulls us out of Afghanistan. Popular decision to pull out of Afghanistan. Doesn't go well, so it leaves an unpopular legacy because of the way it was conducted. Now, pulling out of any country and leaving a power vacuum is not going to go well. Whether it can be managed much better is up for debate. I do think that it could have probably been managed better. I think when you've got people falling off of planes, it's kind of hard to say. No, I think everything here is as good as it could be. But I certainly am not going to be sold the idea that Trump would have managed it much better. Continuing though, in terms of the horse race, post-debate polling shows that 72 hours following the debate, Biden's vote share in the two-way horse race declined by 0.8 points. Similarly, Biden's vote share against Trump in the multi-way also declined by 0.8. The two-way is Trump v. Biden. Multi-way horse race is Trump, Biden, Kennedy, Jill Stein, Cornel West, etc. In what has been generally a steady race, these declines represent the largest single-week drop since horse race tracking began in late 2021. They also occur in the shadow of what has been a challenging... By the way, if that's true, this is also the first presidential election where horse race tracking has happened. So, I don't know. It's still negative, but it's like if you just started doing it in 2021, this is the first presidential race since then. But okay. They also occur in the shadow of what has been a challenging position before the debate. Prior to the debate, Biden's vote share was already 4 points lower, 8 points on margin, than his winning vote share in 2020. Underpinning the decline is an increasingly high concerns about the president's age and a growing split among Democrats about what should happen with his candidacy. A significant majority, 69% of voters, are very or somewhat concerned about the impact of Biden's age on his ability to do the job of president. 40% of Biden's 20 voters now say he should end his campaign, compared to 45% who say he should stay in the race. This represents a significant shift. Another poll had it 55-45, but this has it even closer with only a 5-point difference. That represents a significant shift in this metric from May, where Biden's voters had 62% stay in the race, 25% saying step aside. Swing voters would prefer Biden to leave the race by a nearly 2-to-1 margin. These are data points that Gretchen Whitmer, Pete Buttigieg's camp, Gavin Newsom's camp, and Kamala Harris' camp are certainly aware of and are certainly circulating in closed circles. Democrats other than POTUS performed him in a horse race against Trump, in some cases by a large margin. So what they're saying is that other Democrats did better than Trump, are polling better than Trump, and could be ran possibly as the candidate, but Biden's polling worse. Saying that these other options of the general position, which has been true, that, hey, all people say they want another option, but when you poll them on Gretchen Whitmer, if you poll them on Gavin, Pete Buttigieg, Kamala, they're polling worse than Biden. That is not true anymore, according to this internal pollster. And a CNN poll actually has it that Kamala is running closer to Trump than Biden. Now, Biden was down, I believe, 4 points in the CNN poll. Harris was only down 2 points. So 2 points is a significant margin, by the way. That's where you win and lose an election. But that's only one CNN poll. Again, this is why we need to wait for more data to come out. If we wanted to go into the specifics here, you can see that none of this data looks good. After the debate, the share of voters for which the previous week's news made them feel more favorable towards Biden was at an all-time low of 27%. Here's the 0.8 point dip, which is the largest in any single week, as you can see from the history of them tracking it of November of 21. Here is the multi-candidate ballot, and you can see here that Biden's trailing him by over 7 points. Biden's trailing Trump by 7 points on the multi-candidate option. If you go down further, you can see the amount of concern people have about Biden's age. It's very high. Let's move down to the Buttigieg, Harris, and other comparisons. So Biden's favorability compared to alternative Democrats, Biden's favorability is at 38%, his unfavorability is at 60%. Harris's is at 41%, unfavorability at 52%. Newsom's is at 28% favorable, 32% unfavorable. Now, those numbers are obviously very distinct, very distant. Same thing when you get the Whitmer, it's 24% favorable, 21% unfavorable. There's a lot of undecided in there. Buttigieg is 32% favorable, 28% unfavorable. 40%, I don't know. 55% for Whitmer, 40% for Newsom. These are because these are national unknowns. Newsom, Whitmer, Buttigieg, these are national unknowns. They're known within the Democratic Party. Buttigieg is known in his town. He was known from the 2020 presidential race in the Democratic primary. Whitmer's known in her state as governor and known as a possible kidnapping victim, but she's actually one that people don't know the most about out of all of them. Newsom and Buttigieg is more well known nationally. Buttigieg probably because he's transportation secretary and he's run for president. Newsom probably because he's been running a lot of ads in a lot of other states and such, even if he isn't part of the presidential administration. But all of them, and this is the biggest risk with them, is that they're unknowns. Is that you bring these guys in a national spotlight and you could find very quickly Whitmer, Newsom, or Buttigieg does not connect with voters in the way that you think they would. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be scandal stuff. It can be other things, little things. Ron DeSantis should have been, for a lot of conservative voters, a wet dream. I mean, in some angles, he's even more conservative Trump when it comes to some issues, more conservative than Trump. He has an actual legislative record of success of being able to institute some of these conservative policies, including the loony ones. Compared to Trump, he's been able to do a lot more on the local level in Florida. Now, local politics is different than national politics, but he should have done better than he did. But he didn't connect with voters. Trump called him a kitty diddler, and he crashed. And he didn't do well. And so I don't think Biden's going to call Newsom a kitty diddler. I don't think that's going to happen because he's not Donald Trump. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of unknowns here. But Harris is polling better than Biden here. It's very slight. It's not extreme, but she's 8% less unfavorable and 3% more favorable. And that 8% less unfavorable is outside of the margin of error. Now compare that to Trump, though, who Trump is slightly more unfavorable than Harris, but also slightly more favorable than Harris as well. Also, here you can see the alternatives, if they were competing in the state, in the election, how they would perform. And I think they even did it state by state in the swing states. You can see that Biden, out of all the Democrats, performs the worst in a national two-way race. Buttigieg actually performs the best, him being one of, I think, only 2 candidates that seem to be, actually, I think he seems to be the one ahead the most. Yeah, no, 51% to 49% for Trump. Harris is 49 to 48, 49 to 48 for Newsom as well, but less so. 50.6 to 49.7. But again, relative unknowns. If you go state by state, though, Buttigieg is ahead in Wisconsin. He's ahead in, I believe that is New Hampshire. It's NE2. What's NE2? I believe it's the, it's Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. I'm wrong. Pennsylvania, he's ahead. He's ahead in Minnesota. He's ahead in Nevada. He's ahead in Georgia. He's ahead in Arizona. And he's ahead in North Carolina. Again, this is DNC internal polling, but it shows Buttigieg solidly ahead in many of these states. Actually, no, it doesn't have him ahead in Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, but it has him solidly ahead in at least 3 of these states. The same thing is true for Whitmer, and Harris is not doing great, not doing fantastic in states like North Carolina, but Biden is behind everyone. He's behind everyone in these polls. And if you go to the RCP polling average, you can see Biden is taking a hit. You can see before the debate, if we're talking about June 23rd right here, it was 46.1 for Trump, 55.2 for Biden. Now it's 46.7 for Trump, 43.8 for Biden. And the RCP average takes all the polls together, weights it by credibility, and then boom, gets your result. I know 538 does something similar, and I'll say that's probably the estimator that does it the best. I mean, that does it the best, but has the best results for Biden right now. They take some other things into consideration. Now, when it comes to just who's ahead in the polls, right now it's clear. You can see like Trump is ahead, and that lead from last time we covered it has expanded. If you check their algorithm for who's likely to win, they say their odds are about even. Trump 53 wins 53 times out of 100 in their ran scenarios. Biden wins 47 times out of 100. So Trump very slightly ahead, but the odds here look much, much better than the polling number suggests. Now that doesn't mean I think 538 has the perfect algorithm. I'm just showing you a lot of these numbers you can manipulate depending upon the outcome you want or the point you want to make. So we have a diverse data set. It's part of the reason why I'm still going to wait. So that is a lot of negative polling for Biden. I will also say that if things were to go the way of, if Biden was to go the way of the dodo and leave politics, the way that this would most likely be done, according to people like Clyburn, who is, Representative Jim Clyburn is a pretty well-established Democrat within the party, very high-ranking, strong Biden ally. He says that if Biden was to step aside, that he would support a mini primary ahead of the DNC National Convention, so different candidates like Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, maybe J.B. Pritzker, who knows, could go out there and try to gather votes and try to gather support. And I think that's the way to go. If Biden does step down, it should be a primary process so the public can buy in to whoever the candidate is, and we can test the candidate's coalition making ability, not only the coalition making ability, but their ability to just straight up campaign. Because Gavin Newsom, while he runs a good ad and he's, got coiffed hair or whatever, at the end of the day, if he was to run for president, it's a different situation. We've seen Kamala run for president and she lost, and she got picked as a VP for Biden. And so maybe there is some usefulness and having a primary where we can see people clash, see their interests clash, and have the strongest survive, so to speak. If Donald Trump is a threat to democracy as Democrats portray him, and as I believe him to have a disdain for the institution of democracy, whether it is his calling for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution, whether it is him saying that if he loses an election, it is rigged inherently, which he said on the campaign trail multiple times, whether it was his joking about how he wants to take power on day one, or the ambitious and scary Project 2525, or any of the other authoritarian impulses that Trump has shown, or his isolationist impulses, or even authoritarian light impulses he's shown on the international stage when it comes to foreign affairs, it all leads to me to think that Trump could do irreversible damage to our institutions if he was to be reelected, because he already tried to do damage to our institutions, did a lot, left, was shown to be a criminal, was shown to try to have subverted the election, lost. But if he goes in again, he's going to have the experience of failure and be surrounded by supportive lackeys who are going to be willing to do his beck and call with a plan of what to do this time if the institution bites back. And so if that is to be believed, I think having this process to find the strongest candidate would be the way to go. Now, is Biden the best candidate going into 2024? Well, let's make a list of the pros and cons. Let's start with the cons against Joe Biden. Let's start with the pros. The pros for Joe Biden is, number one, he's an incumbent. And historically speaking, that is a benefit for anybody running for president. He's somebody that people are familiar with. He's shown his ability to win the presidency before. He has an incumbency bias with this run for president. Number two, he's beat Donald Trump before. Everybody else that has ran against Donald Trump, knowing it was just Hillary Clinton, of course, has lost. He won. And if he's beat Donald Trump before, maybe he can beat Donald Trump again. Number three, Joe Biden has fundraised pretty effectively this campaign. And even in the fallout of the disastrous debate performance, has been able to raise between $33 and $40 million for the presidential campaign. And whether he gets it or Kamala Harris gets it, that's more money in the war chest. He is quite an effective fundraiser. In fact, while the RNC is facing financial difficulty after financial difficulty, while the Trump campaign is trying its best to fundraise off of its legal difficulties and succeeding, Biden has been able to consistently roll in the dough. So that's another advantage of Joe Biden. I would say before the Obama legacy was more of an advantage. I would only say it's a slight advantage in this election. His rub off with Joe Biden, I think people have had enough time to figure out an opinion of Joe Biden, irrespective of his relationship with Obama. But of course, having Obama as a trump card that you can kind of pull out at any point in case the thing, in case the going goes rough, as Joe Biden did when people were asking if he was going to run for president still, and Obama came out and says, Joe's the option. He's the one with character. So that's an advantage. Is there any other advantages? He would, of course, continue to have access to his war chest, which outside of Kamala Harris, others would not have necessarily, and they would have to start from scratch. So those are the advantages of Joe Biden. I'm sure there might be a few that I'm missing. Let me ask chat. Do you think there's a few I'm missing? YouTube chat? Site chat? Gutter chat? Before we move on to the negatives? I would also say, and I don't mean this as a joke, the Biden campaign has invested a lot in trying to win over older voters. And there does seem to be some indication as well that has worked. Now, I don't know why they couldn't try to turn that over to another campaign, especially if a lot of those appeals to older voters were based in the fact that he is not Donald Trump and he's running against Donald Trump. But I should also throw that out there as well. Does the chat overlay just so YouTube? No, it shows site chat. DylanBurns.tv at site chat. Okay. There you go. There's my advantages. Oh, and of course, this is true as well. Biden has a really strong record to run off of when it comes to his legislative accomplishments. This is things like the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act. I've talked about a lot of this before. Now, that doesn't mean he has the strongest record he could run on. There's other stuff that I wish we could run on, stuff that I wish we could have done, stuff that I want Biden to do and he didn't do. More aggressive positions he could take on things like marijuana legalization, which I think, if you're an old man trying to not look like an old man, being like, yeah, legalize the pot, and it's popular and it's now legal in over 50 states. This is when the federal government should be coming in. This is one way to pivot the conversation away from your age. Hey, let's get Joe Biden smoking a fat doobie on the campaign trail. I will say, if you wanted him to be sharp in a debate, that is probably the worst thing you could do for him, though. So not before the debates. Now, that's an excuse maybe I would have believed if they said he smoked a doobie before the debates. Anyway, there's the positives for Joe Biden. Let's go through some of the negatives. So the first negative for Joe Biden is that right now his unfavorability rating is really bad. He is very unfavorable to the majority of Americans. There's still like a set of Democrats and supporters that he has that keeps him in like the mid 30s to sometimes high 30s. But I mean, his unfavorability right now is not good, with his favorability sitting at 38%, and currently even, I think, being worse than Donald Trump's, which is not great. There's also the problem of Joe Biden just not being able to campaign like other people can. If Joe Biden can't hit the beat and can't be hitting these campaign stops like crazy, he has to make up for it in other ways, either through fundraising or getting surrogates or others that can go fundraise on his behalf.
Wop and Wop has donated $45.
So Kamala Harris can go out there and hit the campaign stops like crazy. She's young. Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, all of them have a longer endurance than Joe Biden. We have reports indicating that Joe Biden takes naps. We have reports indicating that there's might be two types of Joe Biden, one where he's a lot more lucid and he's active and he can lead the country, and other times where he's an old man, he needs to take naps. And when it comes to leading the country, it's not that it's impossible to lead the country that way. To be like, oh, in 6 hours, you make all of the important decisions, and the rest of it, you just kind of make the whining and dining and, the more laid back stuff, whatever would be necessary to get through the workday. I thought that it's impossible to lead like that better than Trump. In fact, Joe Biden has been doing that, in my opinion, the last 3 years, definitely to the standard of better than Trump. But number one, better than Trump is not a good campaign pitch. I mean, it helps you get the anti-Trump vote, but you need to make a positive message. And it certainly isn't going to help you on the campaign trail. And that leads to the other thing that's connected to that. And this is just Joe Biden's age. Joe Biden comes off as incredibly old. He's in his 80s. He is way older than Lyndon B. Johnson when he resigned. He is extremely elderly when it comes to the historical record of how old a president is. He is setting records. Now, that doesn't mean that it's impossible for him to do the job, but the perception of him as an old man, and combined with his debate performances, combined with the stories that are being read, are leading to people thinking not only that he can't campaign, he's too old to campaign, which is the conclusion that I've come to, but that he's too old to actually run the country. With some polls saying that upwards of 70% of Americans saying that Joe Biden is too old to run the country. And it's one thing to be too old to campaign, but being too old to run the country really knocks you down on somebody's choices for who should be in charge of said country. So that is obviously the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to Joe Biden's re-election campaign. But it's not the only negatives Joe Biden has running for president again, even though it's the biggest one. There's others as well. Joe Biden, historically speaking, while he's been able to pull in the black vote through his connection to Obama, through his, through the Democratic Party establishing a deep relationship with the black community, polling indicates that this election, he might actually be losing a larger portion of the black vote. Whether that comes into fruition or not is another story. I've talked to others who doesn't believe that data, who are working within the community, trying to figure out exactly how the black community is going to vote in 2024. But there is other negative indicators as well, but that is certainly the big one. It's the question of, can he campaign? The unfavorability that Joe Biden has, and that inability to campaign negatively impacting his ability to sell his agenda, which maybe somebody else who could campaign could sell better, or if he had the surrogates to sell it better, They could sell it, just leading to Joe Biden having a lot of weaknesses going into 2024 that he didn't have going into 2020. In 2020, I think the percentages for the people who thought that Joe Biden was too old to do the job was in like the 20s. It was an issue. It was certainly some sort of an issue in the Democratic primary, but it was not anything compared to what it is now. And so those are some of the positives and some of the negatives. Now, some of the positives of Joe Biden, for example, like the war chest thing, this is why I think the only other option is Kamala Harris. And the K-Hive is doing flips right now because they want access to that war chest. They want access to that war chest, trying to start over from scratch when trying to run against the Republicans when the RNC is having fundraising problems. Their fundraising problem should be a massive benefit to the Democrats. The Republicans are having to turn the RNC into Donald Trump's personal piggy bank due to his control over the party and their financial difficulties. Their cutting of their minority outreach programs, the cutting of 1/3 of their staffers. This should be an advantage for Democrats, and having to start over would quickly evaporate that advantage that they have. So I don't think that they would choose somebody who wouldn't be able to access that war chest. There's also the problem again of it just being a very uncomfortable conversation to move past Kamala Harris and go to someone like Gavin Newsom, jumping over who would both be the first woman president and the first black woman president, in order to go for someone like Gavin Newsom, to put it bluntly. Maybe that wouldn't have mattered in the Republican Party, but that certainly matters within the Democratic Party. And Kamala Harris does poll better with black women than other alternatives, including Joe Biden himself, who won the 2020 race within the Democratic Party in large part due to the black vote in South Carolina. War chests don't just fall from the coconut tree. War chests exist in the context of all in which they live and what came before them. So here's my advice. Here's what I would say. Number one, I cannot make a final determination for at least 1 or 2 more weeks. I want to get more data. I want more time to reflect. I want to see Joe Biden's interview this Friday with George Stephanopoulos. I think a lot of Americans are going to be tuning in to see if Joe Biden really did just have a bad day. And it could be a combination of Joe Biden generally not being as good as he used to be presenting, combined with the stutter, combined with him getting old, the jet lag, combined with just a generally bad debate performance, and a bunch of these factors coming together to produce that. And if he's on his A game, well rested, and they get Joe Biden at his best, then maybe he will do good on Friday. But let me also say, Joe Biden doesn't need to just do good in the George Stephanopoulos interview this Friday. He doesn't just need to do good on 1 or 2 ABC News interviews or a few White House press conferences. I was watching his press conference on extreme weather.
Bookworm_AF has donated $10. The K-Hive argument that convinced me. Making Hillary watch the first woman president not be her.
I saw that on Twitter too. If the first woman president is not Hillary Clinton, that is also another advantage for Kamala Harris. Yes, that is definitely for all of us burned Bernie bros. Point is though, I need to wait for more data to come in, more polling data. I need to see how Joe Biden will perform in some of these interviews to make a final determination. Because the last time we have had a situation like this was when Lyndon B. Johnson, due to medical complications, could not run for president again after his 6 years had run up. And the reason I'm saying 6 years, and you're like, wait, but isn't 2 terms? The reason why is Lyndon Johnson had to take over after Kennedy was shot. And so he got 2 years as a freebie, 4 years because he won in a landslide re-election. And then with generally negative polling data from the Vietnam War in large part and health complications, leading to him to step aside and let Hubert Humphrey to come in and take the lantern. And Hubert Humphrey then got curb stomped, and we got Nixon, and we got the era of Nixon. And there was a lot of factors that led to that, but giving up things like the incumbency bias and having to have that chaos at the DNC convention, having to kind of start from scratch, introduce everybody to Humphrey, these things contributed to the loss. So if Democrats are going to take this decision this late in the race to make this move, number one, they've got to do it soon. They've got to do it within the month of July. They cannot put this off to 2 months in the future. They've got to do it sooner rather than later. And if they do it, they've got to do it in an organized fashion where nobody feels too boned and too screwed, and we're not messing with the constituents. I do think that there's a way where you skip over Kamala Harris and you piss off black voters within the party. And then if you do that in order to elect Gavin Newsom, that can come with problems. Especially when there's already some polling data that should indicate that the Democratic Party should not be playing any games right now with pissing off black voters. So the decision needs to be made soon. It needs to be made, if that Daily Beast report, that report on the New York Times report is correct, within the next couple of weeks, which is why I hope that report is true. I hope Biden is genuinely considering whether it's time to drop out. He can't just perform well in these interviews. He has to perform well in every interview moving forward. He has to campaign for the next 4 months to beat Donald Trump.